My name is Daniel Griffin. I work as a detective for the Tampa Police Department. Most of my days start the same way. I park behind the North District station just before my shift, kill the engine, and sit there for a minute looking at the row of patrol cars lined up along the curb. The building is a flat concrete structure with narrow windows and a faded blue sign over the entrance. There's always a couple officers standing outside talking before their shift starts. Someone's usually finishing a cigarette near the metal railing by the door. Inside, the place smells like stale coffee and printer toner. The hallway floors are scuffed from years of boots and rolling chairs. Someone always leaves paperwork stacked on the front desk. A patrol officer might be arguing with the dispatcher over a call log. A detective down the hall is usually talking on the phone with a tired voice, explaining something for the third time to someone who doesn't want to hear it. Most of the work we do is normal police work. Domestic calls, missing persons, robberies, drug arrests, bar fights that spill out onto sidewalks after midnight, cars dumped behind warehouses near the interstate. The kind of problems that come with a big city sitting next to the water. Most things that scare people have a name, an address, and a report number. And that's the way I like it. You show up, you look at the scene, you talk to the people involved, and you figure out what happened. Sometimes it takes hours, sometimes it takes weeks, but there's always something real you can grab onto. A footprint, a witness, a camera angle, something you can put into a report and send upstairs. I've been doing the job long enough to know the city pretty well. I know the streets that stay busy late into the night and the ones that empty out after midnight. I know which apartment complexes generate the most calls and which neighborhoods go quiet after 10 o'clock. I know the docks along the bay where fishermen gather at night, and the blocks where nightclub security has to drag someone outside every weekend. Tampa has plenty of real danger. You don't have to go looking for strange things to find trouble here. But every once in a while, something happens that doesn't fit into a report very well. And when that happens, the only thing that keeps you from making a bad decision is staying calm long enough to think. That's something my grandfather taught me. His name was Frank Griffin. He was a cop for most of his life. He worked patrol for decades in Florida before he finally retired. By the time I was old enough to remember much about it, he'd already stepped away from the job, but the habits never really left him. He woke up early every morning, drank coffee out of the same chipped Best Cop coffee mug, listened to the radio while he read the newspaper at the kitchen table. He kept his old service revolver locked in a small metal box on the top shelf of his closet. He showed it to me exactly once when I was a teenager, and then locked it away again. Said it wasn't something you carried unless you absolutely had to. Most of the stories he told me about police work, well, they were short and practical. He didn't talk about bravery or heroics. He talked about mistakes. The guy who rushed into a house without waiting for backup. The officer who fired when he shouldn't have. The man who panicked when something unexpected happened and ended up making everything worse. Whenever the conversation drifted in that direction, my grandfather would lean back in his chair and tap 2 fingers against the table, like he was thinking. And then he'd say the same thing he always said. Now when things get bad, close your eyes and just breathe. That was it. No speech, no big lesson, just that one sentence. He said panic makes people stupid. Your brain starts racing ahead of the situation. Your hands move before your mind catches up. That's when people make the kind of mistake that they can't take back. So his rule was simple. When things start going wrong, stop for a second. Close your eyes and just breathe. He told me that when I was a kid learning to drive. He told me that when I got into my first fist fight in high school. He told me again the day I graduated from the police academy and pinned on my badge. At the time, I thought it was just something old cops said. A habit. A line he liked repeating. It sounded too simple to matter very much. But years later, standing in a building near the Hillsborough River with doors opening in places they shouldn't, and rooms that didn't make sense, That rule was the only thing that kept me from losing control of the situation completely. It was the only thing that kept me alive. Before that night happened, though, there were two other cases that made me realize Tampa had things in it that didn't belong in any report. And the first one happened at the water. Case 1. Davis Islands. The call came in a little after 2 in the morning. My partner that night was Kevin Brooks, a patrol officer who'd been on the job about 6 years. His first instinct was usually the same as mine. Assume there is a simple explanation and work from there. Dispatch said a man had gone into the water near the Davis Island seawall. The caller was a fisherman who said he saw the man go over the edge of the dock. He sounded shaken, but not hysterical. Calls like that happen more often than people think. Someone slips on wet boards, someone leans too far over the edge, someone drinks too much and loses their balance. We headed across the small bridge towards Davis Islands with the windows cracked open. The air smelled like salt water and engine fuel drifting from the marina. The road was mostly empty except for a couple cars parked near the shoreline. When we pulled into the gravel lot beside the dock, a man was standing near the end of the seawall waving his arms. He was wearing rubber boots and a thick fishing jacket with reflective tape along the sleeves. His tackle bag sat on the ground beside him. Kevin stepped out of the cruiser first. "Yeah, you the one that called?" The man nodded quickly. "Yeah," he began. My name's Ryan Foster. I was fishing out here when the guy went into the water." Ryan pointed down the dock. The wooden walkway stretched about 30 feet over the channel before opening into a small square platform at the end. A ladder dipped down into the water from the far side. "What happened exactly?" I asked. Ryan rubbed both hands across the top of his head, like he was trying to steady himself. "Well, there was a guy standing out there. I didn't know him. He wasn't fishing, just standing near the edge," he said. Ryan glanced back toward the platform again. I heard him yell, and then I saw him go over." "Did he jump?" Kevin asked. Ryan shook his head. No, I don't think so. It happened too fast." Kevin and I walked out onto the dock while Ryan stayed back near the cruiser. The boards creaked slightly under our boots as we moved toward the end. A tackle box sat open halfway down the walkway with plastic lures scattered across the planks. A bait bucket had tipped over nearby, leaking a thin stream of water toward the edge. Near the platform, we found a single running shoe lying on its side. The lace hung over the edge of the dock and dipped into the water. I crouched down and aimed my flashlight across the boards. There were drag marks on the wood. Long streaks where something had scraped toward the ladder. Kevin leaned over the railing and shined his light down between the planks. The water below was black and slow-moving, reflecting a few distant lights from the buildings across the bay. For a moment, nothing happened. And then something hit the underside of the dock. The boards rattled beneath our feet. Kevin stepped back slightly. "You hear that?" he said. I nodded. The ladder at the edge of the platform moved. At first it looked like the water had simply pushed it, and then the metal rails shook again. Kevin raised his gun. I aimed my flashlight directly down the ladder, just as something began moving upward. A hand appeared first. Long fingers wrapped around the metal rail. The skin was gray and slick, stretched tight across narrow knuckles. Another hand gripped the opposite rail. And then a head slowly rose into the beam. It didn't look human. The mouth ran vertically down the center of its face. When it opened slightly, rows of narrow teeth showed in the gap. Water streamed off its shoulders as it lifted itself higher. The eyes reflected the flashlight beam, shining pale and glassy in the dark. For a moment, it held there on the ladder, just looking at us. And then Kevin fired. The gunshot cracked across the channel and echoed off the buildings along the shoreline. The thing dropped backward instantly, disappearing beneath the surface. The water went still. Neither of us spoke, and then something slammed the dock from underneath. The platform jumped hard enough to shake the railing. A board near the edge split with a loud crack. Kevin stumbled backward and caught himself against the railing. I grabbed his sleeve and pulled him away from the ladder. The water below churned once, sending small waves slapping against the dock supports. And then it settled again. The flashlight beam cut across the surface. Nothing came back up. No head, no hands, no sign of the man Ryan said had been standing there. Just black water sliding slowly through the channel. Kevin lowered his gun slightly. We stood there another minute, just watching the ladder. It didn't move again. Kevin eventually radioed dispatch and requested a dive team. Ryan Foster stayed near the cruiser the entire time, pacing in small circles and glancing toward the dock every few seconds. When we told him divers were coming, he kept repeating that the man had just been standing there 1 second, and gone the next. The search lasted until almost sunrise. Divers went into the channel twice. They never found the body. Later that morning, the report was filed as a probable drowning. There wasn't enough evidence for anything else. Case 2. Club O negative. The missing girl case started early that evening. Her name was Emma Collins, 8 years old, brown hair cut to her shoulders, last seen wearing a yellow t-shirt with a cartoon dolphin on the front, and white sneakers. Her mother reported her missing just before sunset. According to the report, Emma had been outside a convenience store near South Howard Avenue with a woman no one in the family recognized. A security camera showed the woman walking with Emma toward the busier part of the nightlife district. The woman wasn't dragging her. She wasn't forcing her into a car. She just walked beside her, with one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. And that made the whole thing worse. When people are taking that quietly, usually means the person doing it already planned everything. By the time I picked up the case, patrol officers had already checked several nearby businesses and pulled whatever camera footage they could find. Most of it showed the same thing: Emma and the woman walking through the area together. The last useful camera angle caught them passing in front of a bar on South Howard. After that, the trail disappeared. I spent the next few hours walking the block, going door to door through the clubs and restaurants along the street. South Howard stays busy at night. Music spills out of open doors, and people move from bar to bar until well past midnight. Most of the employees were cooperative. A few recognized the girl from the still images we'd pulled from the cameras. Nobody knew where she'd gone. Around 11 o'clock, one of the bartenders mentioned something that caught my attention. He said the woman had walked past his place and crossed the street toward another club about half a block down. I followed his finger down the sidewalk. The building he pointed to had a black painted brick exterior and a narrow entrance tucked between two larger bars. Above the doorway hung a red neon sign: Club O negative. Two men in dark suits stood just outside the entrance. They weren't checking IDs or shouting at people like most bouncers on that street. They just stood there with their hands folded in front of them, watching the crowd. Music drifted through the door every time somebody stepped inside. I crossed the street and walked toward them. One of the men opened the door without asking a question. Inside, the lighting was low and red. The room stretched deeper than it looked from the outside. Dark booths lined the walls, and mirrored panels reflected the glow from small lamps hanging above the door. A slow, heavy rhythm pulsed through the floor from the speakers. What stood out first wasn't the music. It was the quiet. There were plenty of people inside, but nobody was shouting or stumbling around like they do in most clubs. Conversation stayed quiet. People sat close together in the booths. A few stood near the bar holding glasses filled with dark red liquid. Several of the patrons wore sunglasses. Indoors. That wasn't illegal, but it was strange. The bartenders wore black gloves as they worked behind the counter. I moved slowly through the room, scanning faces and looking for the woman from the security footage. Nobody matched the image we'd pulled earlier. But people were watching me, and I could feel it. Not openly, just small glances from the corners of booths or reflections in the mirrored wall panels. After about a minute, a woman in a black dress approached me from the side of the room. "Detective Griffin?" she asked calmly. I hadn't shown my badge yet. I looked at her a moment. "Yes," I said. She nodded politely. "Mr. Vallon would like to speak with you." "Who's Mr. Vallon?" I asked. "The owner." She gestured toward a hallway near the back of the club. I followed her past the bar and through a short corridor that led to a closed office door. She knocked once and stepped aside. "Come in," a voice said. The office was smaller than I expected. A wooden desk sat near the center of the room with a single lamp casting a soft yellow light across its surface. Dark curtains covered the windows. Framed black and white photographs hung on the walls. Behind the desk sat a man who looked older than most of the club in the crowd. He stood as I entered. "I'm George Vallon," he said. He was about 5'3", maybe a little shorter. His blonde hair had thinned across the top of his head, leaving the sides brushed neatly back. He wore a dark suit that looked expensive without being flashy. His eyes were a bright, sharp green. They didn't move much. "Detective Griffin," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. "Please sit." I stayed standing. "Yeah, I'm looking for a missing girl," I began. 8 years old, brown hair, last seen near this block." George folded his hands together. Yes, I know." That answer caught my attention. "You know," I repeated. George nodded once. "You know, I knew your grandfather." That stopped me for a moment. "Frank Griffin," George continued. "Your grandfather helped me once. A long time ago." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "Otherwise, things would have gone badly for you here." George's expression didn't change. "The girl is not here. You are looking in the wrong place." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small notepad. With a pen, he wrote 2 street names and slid the paper across the desk. "South Howard and West Azeel," he began. "The alley behind the pawn shop." He met my eyes again. "I believe you'll find what you're looking for there." I didn't touch the paper yet. "Why would you tell me that?" I asked. George's lips moved slightly, almost forming a smile. "Because I owe your grandfather." He folded his hands again. I took the paper. The hallway outside felt darker when I stepped back into it. As I walked through the club again, several of the people wearing sunglasses slowly turned their heads to watch me pass. Nobody spoke or tried to stop me. I stepped outside and walked straight to my car. The alley George had written down was only a few blocks away. Behind the pawn shop, the streetlight cast a weak yellow glow across a narrow strip of pavement. A dumpster sat near the wall with broken fence pallets stacked beside it. A chain-link fence ran along the back of the property. A white van was parked halfway down the alley. The side door was open a few inches. I stepped closer and then I heard it. A small voice crying inside the van. I pulled the door open, and Emma Collins sat on the floor behind a stack of plastic storage bins, hugging her knees. A woman in her 30s was crouched beside her. The woman jerked her head toward me and grabbed a knife from the floor. "Stay back," she said. "I just wanted a child. I just wanted someone to take care of." She lunged forward then. I grabbed her wrist and twisted the knife out of her hand. The blade clattered against the pavement as I pushed her against the side of the van and cuffed her. Emma stayed where she was, crying quietly. And a few minutes later, backup arrived. The woman's name was Lisa Williams. She'd taken Emma earlier that evening, while the girl's mother was inside the convenience store. But now the girl was safe. Case 3. The building near the river. The call about the building came in a few weeks after the Collins case. It was close to 1 a.m. I was at a desk finishing paperwork when dispatch radioed a patrol unit to check an abandoned office building near the Hillsborough River. 2 people in apartments across the street said they heard yelling coming from the inside. First, it sounded like the kind of call patrol clears in 10 minutes. A vacant building draws squatters, drunks, teenagers, copper thieves, all kinds of people who think an empty property means privacy. Usually it ends with somebody being told to leave or getting arrested for trespassing. Then the patrol officer asked for a detective. That got my attention. I drove over the station and crossed into West Tampa with the windows cracked. The streets were mostly empty. A few storefronts still had security lights on. The river sat black beyond the buildings, and every so often a light from the far bank flashed across the windshield. The office building stood by itself on a cracked lot ringed with chain-link fence. Parts of the fence had collapsed inward. Weeds pushed through the asphalt in long, ugly patches. The building inside was 5 stories of stained concrete and dark windows, with sections of glass missing from the upper floors. The front doors were gone. A plywood sign bolted to the fence announced a demolition date that had already been pushed back twice. A patrol cruiser sat near the curb with its headlights washing over the front steps. The officer waiting outside introduced himself as Michael Reed. He was young, maybe 26 or 27, with that look newer cops get when they don't want to admit something bothered them. "So you hear the yelling yourself?" I asked. Reed nodded. Yeah, from inside. Sounded like one guy at first, then maybe more than one." "You went in?" Maybe a foot or 2, he said. "Lobby looked empty, and then I heard something move deeper in the building." He glanced toward the entrance. "I called out and nobody answered. It sounded like somebody ran upstairs." "You want backup?" I asked. He looked relieved by the question, but he shook his head. "I already asked dispatch to note it. I figured I'd wait for you first." I looked at the dark opening where the front doors used to be. "You coming in with me?" Reed hesitated, then said, "You want me to?" I thought about it for a second and shook my head. No, stay outside. Somebody runs, I want somebody at the car. And if I need more people, I'll call it. That wasn't a typical decision. Normally both of us would go in. But I could tell this kid looked genuinely scared about going inside. I figured I'd step in, be careful, see what was going on, and go from there. He nodded and stepped back toward his cruiser. I switched on my flashlight and walked toward the entrance. My light moved across the lobby and found cubicles, broken desks, a toppled office chair, and strips of hanging ceiling materials. Old papers covered parts of the floor. Filing cabinets stood open and empty against one wall. The place looked dead. I took maybe 6 steps inside and reached for my radio. "Dispatch, Detective Griffin. I'm inside the building with Officer Reed outside on perimeter." Nothing came back except a short burst of static. I turned around immediately to go back outside and call for backup from Reed's cruiser. But the opening where the front doors had been was gone. There should have been a rectangular gap showing the patrol headlights and the lot outside. Instead, there was a solid wall with peeling paint. and a water stain running from shoulder height to the floor. I walked over and put my hand on it. Drywall, cold, no frame, no seam, no door. "Read," I yelled. My voice carried through the lobby and died in the back of the building. No answer. I yelled again and still nothing. At that point, I stopped treating it like a building clearance and started treating it like an emergency. I drew my pistol, I turned, and I headed for the back of the lobby to look for another exit. A narrow hall ran behind the cubicles toward a stairwell door with frosted safety glass. I reached it in 10 seconds, shoved it open, and went down one flight. Concrete steps, rust on the railings, water stains on the walls. I hit the landing, pushed through the next door, and stepped straight back into the same lobby. Same broken desk and cubicles and paper on the floor. I stared at it for one full second, then turned, went back to the stairwell, and ran up instead. One flight up, two at a time, door at the landing, and I shoved through it hard. And I came out onto that same lobby floor again. And my stomach dropped. I wasn't dealing with a bad floor plan. I wasn't turned around. I wasn't tired. I didn't know what this was, but I was trapped. I moved quickly now, checking every office around the lobby, trying to find a broken window, a service exit, anything. The first 2 offices were empty except for desks and carpet stains. The third had a row of chairs against the wall and nothing else. The 4th room stopped me cold. It was a conference room. Long table, high-backed office chairs, water rings on the wood, a legal pad near one seat, a glass pitcher sitting on its side near the center. Around the table sat 6 people, 3 men and 3 women. Office clothes, button-down shirts, jackets, slacks. One woman had a silk scarf looped at the neck. One man had his sleeves rolled to his forearms. Their hands rested on the table in front of them, like they were waiting for someone to begin a meeting. But there was a problem. None of them had heads. The necks ended dark and flat above the collars. No blood running, no fresh wounds. Just dry, blackened stumps where heads should have been. One of them still held the pen. I backed out and I shut the door. I didn't investigate, I didn't step closer. I didn't try to rationalize it. I just moved away from that room as fast as I could without running. I headed back for where I thought the stairwell should be. And the wall was different. The frosted glass door was gone. In its place was another office door with peeling beige paint and a brass number plate hanging crooked from one screw. I grabbed the handle, opened it, and found what looked like an old break room. Small tables, a sink, a fridge on its side, vending machines stripped open. Several metal cages lined the far wall, some open, some shut. Something moved under one of the tables. At first I thought it was a stray dog, and then it stepped into the light. It had the body of a medium-sized dog and the head of a tabby cat. Its whiskers twitched. It looked directly at me with wide, yellow eyes. Another thing trotted behind it. That one had the body of a cat and the head of a small dog with pointed ears. It opened its mouth and barked once. The dog-bodied thing rubbed its cat face against a chair leg and started purring. I shut the door hard. I stood there in the hallway, listening. At first there was nothing. And then somewhere deeper in the building, a door slammed. And then another and another. I turned and moved fast in the opposite direction. The hall seemed longer than it had been before. Doors that shouldn't have been there lined the walls now. My flashlight beam caught old, crooked, motivational posters, still hanging crooked in places. Teamwork? Integrity? Vision? The paper under the glass had bubbled from moisture and age. I passed one doorway and saw another office inside it. A small office, a single table in the center, with a dollhouse on top. I almost kept going, and then my light passed over it again, and I stopped. The dollhouse was lit from inside by a warm yellow glow. It was detailed enough to show tiny wallpaper, tiny curtains, tiny chairs. A front wall had been cut away, so the rooms inside were fully visible. I stepped closer. There were figures inside. Tiny men and women and children. Every single one of them stood facing the open side of the house. Every single one of them was smiling. And every one of them held a little knife. Written in small black letters above the open front was a single sentence. When Smiley is missing, no one smiles. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I didn't need to see anything else. The figures didn't move while I stood there, but they looked ready to. It felt like if I stayed another 5 seconds, every one of those little arms would lift at once. I backed quickly out of the room, and the hallway outside had changed again. What should have been a straight path back to the lobby now bent left into darkness. A ceiling tile fell somewhere nearby and burst on the floor. And then footsteps started above me. Several, fast running. I turned the other direction and found a stairwell door at the end of the hall. I ran to it, shoved it open, and took the steps upward. 1 flight, 2, 3. The air changed as I climbed. It got colder, then warmer, then cold again. On the 4th landing, the walls were damp enough to shine in the flashlight beam. On the 5th, the beam hit open space. I stopped. There should have been another set of stairs and another ceiling above me. But there was no ceiling. Above the landing was an open black sky filled with stars. Not city sky, not a hole in the roof. This was vast and endless. The stairwell walls simply ended, jagged and broken, and above them stretched a dark universe that did not belong over Tampa, Florida. Something huge moved across it. Then another. At first my brain tried to make them into clouds, then shadows, and then some kind of illusion caused by darkness. They weren't. They were enormous shapes floating slowly through the stars, too large for my eyes to fully take in at once. Long limbs or tendrils hung beneath them. Parts of them pulsed as they moved. One turned, or maybe rolled, and I saw a suggestion of clustered eyes spread across something massive. I don't know how else to describe it. They looked like things that shouldn't fit into the world. One drifted directly over the open top of the stairwell. Something dangled beneath it, reaching down through the stars like roots hanging from the underside of a boat. I backed down a step, then another. The things kept floating overhead. If one of those things had leaned closer even a little, I think I would have emptied my magazine at it out of pure terror, and it would have made no difference at all. I turned and ran this time down the stairs. By the time I hit the lower landing, I was breathing hard. I pushed through the nearest door expecting the lobby, and instead I stepped into another floor entirely. Long rows of cubicles stretched out in both directions. Some had old family photos still pinned to fabric walls. Some had plastic plants on the desks. Computer monitors sat dusty and cracked in the corners. The place looked like people had stood up in the middle of a workday and just never come back. And then I heard voices, low and close, from somewhere between the cubicles. I moved down the aisle with my gun up and my flashlight in my left hand. The whispering followed me. Sometimes it sounded like it was ahead, sometimes behind me. I rounded a divider and found a water cooler in the center of a small break area. Its blue jug was full. Something hit it from inside. The plastic jumped. A second impact bulged the side of the bottle outward. I kept moving. At the end of the cubicle row, I found another conference room. I didn't want to look in, but the door was already standing open. The headless people were in there again. Same six, same positions, but one change. The chair at the end of the table was no longer empty. A seventh figure sat there now. It wore a suit. Its hands rested on the table. Its neck ended in the same black stump as the others, and on the notepad in front of it, fresh dark writing, there were 3 words: "Stay for minutes." I didn't read anything else. I turned and got out of there. And that was the moment panic really hit me. I stopped trying to search. I stopped trying to solve the layout. I just wanted out. I ran through 2 more hallways, shoved through a door, and came out in what looked like a records room with shelves bolted to the floor. Cardboard boxes sat collapsed in piles. One box near the doorway had children's toys inside it. Plastic blocks, a stuffed bear, a doll with no eyes. I backed away from that room and nearly fell when another door slammed somewhere behind me. And then the building woke up completely. It started with a sound of laughter. More than one person, maybe 10 or 20. Men, women, children, all laughing at once from different parts of the floor. Then footsteps started above me. Then below me. Something dragged along the wall to my right with a slow scraping sound. A cubicle partition near the far end of the room tipped over by itself. Dust shook loose from overhead. The laughter got louder. A scream joined it, then another, and then a deep animal sound that didn't belong in any building at all. The floor trembled under my boots. I rounded a corner and hit a dead-end wall that should not have been there. I turned back and saw doors all along the hall starting to swing open. Slowly at first, then wider. Dark rooms beyond them, shapes moving inside some of them. The building shook harder. Ceiling debris fell around me. The laughter was everywhere now, mixed with running footsteps, with crying, with barks, with purring, with a high, thin noise like metal being bent. It was horrifying. And that's when I thought of my grandfather. A memory hitting me at the exact right second. Frank Griffin at his kitchen table, coffee mug in one hand, looking at me over the rim and saying the same thing he'd said my whole life. When things get bad, close your eyes and just breathe. I did exactly that. I holstered my pistol, closed my eyes. I stood still in that hallway while the building shook around me and let the air move slowly in and out of my lungs. The noises got louder at first. It was like the laughter was right behind me, footsteps charging down the hall, the floor vibrating under my feet. And then the building went completely quiet. I opened my eyes. I was standing in the original lobby. The opening where the front doors had been was back. Headlights from Michael Reed's cruiser shone through it across the floor. I didn't wait to see if it would change again. I ran straight out of that building, down the steps, and into the lot. Reed pushed off his cruiser as soon as he saw me. "You good?" "Yeah," I said. That didn't sound like I meant it. "How long was I in there?" I asked. He shrugged. "A minute? Maybe 2? I looked back at the building. It had felt like hours. Reed followed my eyes. "You want me to call more units?" I thought about the conference room, the animal heads, the dollhouse, the open stairwell under those impossible stars with those giant things floating overhead. I shook my head. No, I said. Seal it. And keep people out until demolition. Reed frowned, but nodded. Well, a few weeks later, that building did come down. I drove by on the second day of demolition and watched an excavator punch through the upper floors. Concrete collapsed inward. Huge plumes of dust rolled out into the sky. From the street, it looked ordinary. Just an old building. But I knew better. I still work as a detective in Tampa. I still park behind the same station and walk past the same row of patrol cars. The same front desk gets buried under paperwork. The same tired voices carry down the hallway at the end of a long shift. Most of the calls are still the kind you can explain when the sun comes up. A break-in and missing wallet, a drunk guy with a split lip outside a bar, something with a witness, a camera, a report number. That part never changed. What changed was me. I don't go near the Davis Island seawall at night unless I absolutely have to. If a call comes in from that dock after dark, I bring more people than I need and I keep my eyes on that ladder. I don't walk into places like Club O Negative anymore, thinking a badge and a gun make me the most dangerous thing in the room. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes all they do is tell something older and worse, exactly who you are. And I don't enter abandoned buildings by the river anymore. Not ever again. The one near the Hillsborough River is gone now. The lot is flat. The rubble was hauled off weeks after demolition, and if you drove past it today, you'd never know what stood there. You'd see dirt, weeds, and a temporary fence. Nothing more. But I know what was inside it. I know what sat around that conference table. I know what moved around in that break room. I know what stared out of that dollhouse. And sometimes, late at night, I still think about that stairwell with no ceiling, that black sky, those things drifting overhead. I never asked my grandfather what he meant the first 100 times he told me to close my eyes and breathe. I thought it was just one of those things old cops say because they've run out of patience and, just want to sound wise. But you know what I think now? I think that maybe he learned that rule the hard way. Maybe he learned it on a bad call. Maybe he learned it from somebody like George of Allen. Maybe he learned it from standing in front of something he knew he couldn't fight. I'll never know. He's gone now. What I do know is that he was right. Because sometimes the worst thing you can do is panic. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and the wrong door, the wrong shot, the wrong step, is 1 second of control. So when things get bad, when the room starts to feel wrong, when the sounds around me stop making sense, I do the only thing that's ever worked. I close my eyes and I breathe.